The annual company party was always a milestone. For many, it was a night of celebration. For me, it became the beginning of the end. I already knew, I'd heard the rumors, seen the signs. She said they were just long meetings, that he was demanding but fair. The boss I admired, the leader I praised, was also the man who shared my wife with me. When I heard that they would be going to the party together, something in me broke for good. Maybe it was the weight of the confirmation, maybe it was the anger I'd been holding in for months. It didn't matter. I needed to see for myself. In the brightly lit hall, with loud music and laughter echoing, they were there. He had his arm casually around her waist, his eyes laughing at something she said. I was no longer the husband. I was the spectator of a scene that should have been mine. I walked down the hall, each step accompanied by the deafening throbbing of my heart. When she saw me, her smile faded. Her face turned pale, her eyes searching for an excuse, a way out, anything. "Darling, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to disguise her nervousness with a fake smile. I didn't answer. I just stared, allowing the weight of the silence to crush her. She mumbled something about not wanting to bother me, about how it wasn't at all what it seemed. Each word sounded emptier than the last. He, the boss, looked at me with a mixture of surprise and contempt. He made no effort to hide his disdain. This infuriated me even more. As if I were the intruder in his life. As if he had the right to be there by her side, while I was relegated to the role of supporting player. "What doesn't it look like, exactly?" I finally asked, my voice low but charged. She hesitated. The room, once full of sounds, seemed to have fallen silent around us. "You don't understand." It doesn't mean anything," she said, trying to keep her composure. "It means nothing." I repeated, my anger finally boiling over. "Nothing is exactly what's left of our marriage because of you." The boss stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Look, I think we'd better talk somewhere else. This isn't appropriate." I glared at him, the audacity in his tone irritating me even more. "Appropriate?" I laughed humorlessly. "Appropriate would be for you not to touch other people's women." By now, a small crowd was beginning to form around us. Curious people, employees pretending to get something to drink, but who wanted to watch the spectacle of a life falling apart in public. She noticed and tried to push me away. "Please don't do that here. Let's go home and talk," she begged, her voice broken. "Talk?" I replied. "How did you talk to him? In the office? In the car? Or did you go straight to bed?" Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was shame. It didn't matter. There was no more room for the benefit of the doubt. "I know everything. Every message, every lame excuse. And the worst thing of all. You still think you can fool me. No, we're not going to talk at home. No more home, no more marriage. I'm here to tell you it's over." She sobbed, trying to find words that could stop me, but nothing she could say could change what was already done. The boss, visibly uncomfortable, took another step back, perhaps feeling the weight of his own role in all this. But there was something else in the air, something he didn't know yet. Something she didn't know either. Something I had carefully prepared, because betrayals never come without consequences. And while she cried, while he tried to maintain a facade of indifference, I knew that this moment was just the beginning. The beginning of something much bigger. After all, betrayal unfolds not only in the pain of the betrayed, but also in the downfall of the betrayers. But what if what I discovered that night was even more devastating than I had imagined? What if something I hadn't expected came to light, changing everything? Welcome to the channel where we explore the devastating consequences of betrayal. Here, we make it clear, we do not support or condone any form of infidelity. All the stories you hear are fictional, created to reveal how betrayal eats away at lives, families and dreams. Now, get ready to dive into an intense story, full of emotions and twists and turns, that will leave you pondering until the very end. Good story, and let the shock begin. Lucas and Mariana had one of those stories that seemed perfect from the outside. They met while still at university, a chance encounter in the queue at a cafe that quickly turned into conversations about dreams, plans, and a future that seemed bright. Lucas was methodical, determined, and reliable. He had a discreet charm that made him effortlessly admired. Mariana, on the other hand, was outgoing, full of life and carried a magnetic aura. Both seemed to complement each other like custom-made pieces. Over the years, they built a life that anyone would consider enviable. They got married in a small but emotional ceremony, where every glance exchanged seemed to be a silent promise that nothing would ever shake that love. He was working in an up-and-coming technology company, where he was gradually growing, aiming one day to reach a leadership position. Mariana, on the other hand, stood out in the marketing department of a large corporation. She was ambitious and constantly praised for her creative ideas, something that earned her the trust of her team and especially her boss, Leonardo. The house they bought reflected exactly who they were as a couple, modern, cozy and carefully planned. Every detail had been hand-picked by Mariana, who loved transforming spaces into welcoming environments. The kitchen was the heart of the home, a place where Lucas and Mariana shared more than meals, but also moments of complicity that only those who love understand. However, even in lives that seem flawless, there are cracks that start out small, almost imperceptible, until time makes them deep. Lucas, in his incessant quest to achieve his professional goals, spent more hours in the office than at home. The promotion he so desperately wanted required absolute dedication, and he believed that this effort would guarantee an even better future for both of them. Mariana's love was never in doubt, but there were nights when loneliness seemed a constant visitor. The silent company of the sofa and wine became more familiar than the laughter that once filled the house. Even so, Mariana didn't complain. She understood the weight of responsibility that Lucas carried. Even when romantic dinners were replaced by hurried messages saying he would be late, or when planned weekends ended in last-minute meetings, she found ways to keep the flame burning. Or at least she tried. At work, Mariana was a rising star. Leonardo, her boss, was a charismatic figure, always attentive to the potential of his team. He was a man who knew how to use the right words to motivate and delight. Mariana admired his strategic vision and his way of leading with confidence. Casual conversations about campaigns and targets eventually turned into deeper dialogues, about aspirations, difficulties and even deferred dreams. Leonardo seemed to listen attentively, something that Mariana felt was lacking at home. While Lucas immersed himself in spreadsheets and deadlines, Mariana found herself increasingly involved in important projects at the company. The enthusiasm for new campaigns, the recognition of her team and Leonardo's constant encouragement were a welcome escape from the empty nights. She told herself that it was all part of her professional development, but there was something else. Something she preferred not to analyze too deeply. Lucas, although absorbed in his work, was not blind to the changes at home. He noticed that Mariana's smiles were no longer as frequent and that she seemed to find joy in places they didn't share. Conversations about each other's day became short, almost protocol, and there was an invisible chasm growing between them. He tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that with time and effort, everything would return to normal. But doubts began to erode the security he had always had in the relationship. One evening, during a rare dinner together, Lucas looked at Mariana and felt an urgent need to talk. He wasn't sure what, but he needed to connect with her again. "I know I've been absent," he began, with a tone of voice that was both calm and full of emotion. "It's just that, all this I'm doing is for us, for our future. You know that, don't you?" Mariana, who was absent-mindedly swirling the wine in her glass, looked up at him. There was a mixture of understanding and weariness in her expression. "I know, Lucas. I've always known. But sometimes I miss when things were simpler. When it was just the two of us, you know." Her words hit Lucas like an undeniable truth. He nodded, promising himself that he would do something to reverse it. But silent promises, however sincere, are easy to break in the face of routine and the pressures of everyday life. At work, Mariana continued to excel. Leonardo's compliments and her ability to notice details that no one else had noticed made her feel a sense of recognition that she hadn't experienced for a long time. He knew how to compliment her without seeming superficial, how to divert her attention from her problems with a witty comment or a look of approval. "You're a natural, Mariana," he once said after a successful meeting. "It's rare to find someone who combines creativity and discipline like you do. I'm lucky to have you on my team." She smiled, feeling the warmth of the compliment fill an empty space she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't about Leonardo, necessarily. It was about the feeling of being seen, valued, as she hadn't felt for a long time. Meanwhile, Lucas remained immersed in his corporate world, without realizing that the emotional distance between him and Mariana was growing every day. He thought that his efforts were building something solid, but he didn't realize that, little by little, the foundations of their relationship were crumbling. Life went on in a precarious balance. A balance that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have foreseen. December brought with it a certain melancholy. Christmas lights illuminated the streets and shop windows, but inside Lucas and Mariana's house, the atmosphere seemed increasingly heavy, silent, almost icy. Conversations between them became rare and glances were avoided. Lucas had noticed that Mariana was spending more time away, but he preferred to believe that it was just the pressure of end-of-year work, a convenient justification that he repeated to himself like a mantra. Mariana, on the other hand, felt divided. Inside her, a battle was raging between remorse and the need to fill something that had felt empty for so long. Leonardo had become a constant presence, both at work and in her mind. He knew how to lead her, how to make her feel that her value went beyond the obvious. His words had the right weight, his attention seemed genuine, something Mariana desperately craved. But there was also guilt, that silent shadow that followed her every time she crossed the threshold. Friday evening arrived and Lucas was in the office as usual. Mariana was preparing for another company event, the annual party that promised to be grand. While she was choosing a dress from her closet, she stopped for a moment and looked at her reflection in the mirror. There was something in her eyes that she didn't recognize, a mixture of excitement and fear. She took a deep breath, ignoring the tightness in her chest. Deep down, she knew she was crossing an invisible line that night, but she tried to convince herself that it was just another work event. In the office, Lucas was restless. The noise of the keyboard and the monotonous sound of the air conditioning couldn't drown out the restlessness in his mind. Something inside him felt wrong, an intuition he couldn't explain. He picked up his phone and sent a short message to Mariana, "How's the party?" Time passed and no reply came. He looked at his watch, it was already past midnight. Determined, he grabbed his coat and left the office. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he needed to see Mariana, perhaps to calm the anxiety that was consuming him. In the event hall, Mariana looked stunning, and Leonardo made no effort to hide his admiration. He approached her frequently, his compliments accompanied by calculated smiles. The lights twinkled, the guests danced, but for Mariana, everything seemed to unfold in slow motion. Every casual touch, every lingering glance seemed to be another step towards the abyss. She knew it, but she couldn't stop. As Lucas drove, his mind was filled with disconnected thoughts. He looked back on moments with Mariana, from the small everyday happinesses to the recent silences that had become so frequent. Something pushed him to continue, to find out what was wrong. He arrived at the party venue and parked in the distance, his heart beating faster with every step. Inside the hall, Mariana was sitting with Leonardo at a table far away. Their laughter seemed natural, but there was an almost palpable tension between them. She was holding a glass of wine, while Leonardo leaned slightly towards her, his face too close, his gaze too intense. When he touched her hand on the table, Mariana hesitated, but didn't pull away. There was something in that gesture that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't experienced for a long time. Lucas entered, mingling with the guests. He passed unnoticed, his eyes scanning the room in search of Mariana. That's when he saw her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. There she was, laughing, with a sparkle in her eye that he hadn't seen for months. But it wasn't him. And then he saw Leonardo, and the way he looked at her, how close the two of them were. A shiver ran down his spine. He stood still, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe it was just a friendship that he didn't understand. But when Leonardo leaned closer and whispered something in Mariana's ear, making her smile in a way that Lucas hadn't seen for years, reality hit him like a punch in the stomach. Mariana noticed the stare. She turned and met Lucas' eyes. The smile instantly disappeared from her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Leonardo noticed the change in her expression and turned to look in the same direction. Lucas didn't wait for them to make a move. He walked over to the table, each step echoing like thunder in his mind. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," said Lucas, his voice low but charged with tension. Mariana tried to compose herself. "Lucas, what are you doing here? I thought you were in the office. And I thought you were at a work party. You seem to be having a lot of fun." He looked directly at Leonardo, whose confident expression was beginning to waver. "It's not what you think," Mariana began, but her voice sounded weak, without conviction. Lucas let out a dry laugh, full of bitterness. "Isn't it? Then please tell me what it is." Leonardo intervened, trying to sound confident. "Perhaps we should talk at another time. This isn't appropriate." "Not appropriate?" Lucas repeated, his voice now louder. "Inappropriate is what you two are doing." The room, which until then had been full of chatter and laughter, began to grow quieter. The guests nearby tried to disguise their curiosity, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Mariana stood up, trying to calm Lucas down. "Can we talk about this at home, please?" "There's nothing more to talk about, Mariana. I already know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Mariana felt her world crumble right there, in the middle of the hall, in front of dozens of curious stares. Leonardo, realizing that he no longer had control over the situation, discreetly walked away. But for Lucas, that wasn't enough. He knew the betrayal didn't end there, he knew there was more to discover. And the weight of this imminent truth made the air almost impossible to breathe. The morning after that tumultuous night, Lucas woke up early. It wasn't for lack of sleep, but because he couldn't stay in bed. The weight of what he had witnessed the night before felt like an anchor pulling him down to the bottom of a dark sea. He dressed mechanically, without looking at the space next to him in the closet, where Mariana's clothes remained intact, as if nothing had happened. He knew he had to confront her. He couldn't simply ignore the emptiness that had settled between them, nor the betrayal that was now taking concrete form in his mind. He picked up his phone and typed a short message to Mariana, asking her to come home so they could talk. The reply was evasive, but she agreed. Lucas didn't want to do it, but he knew it was necessary. A short while later, Mariana walked through the door. Her steps were hesitant and the look she gave Lucas was a mixture of embarrassment and caution. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands intertwined and his head down. The silence that hung between them was oppressive, almost palpable. "I'm here," she said, finally breaking the ice. Her voice sounded shaky, as if she expected him to explode at any moment. Lucas looked up, but didn't respond immediately. He watched her with an expression that mixed pain and disappointment, as if he were trying to recognize the person in front of him. "Why?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The word carried such a weight that it seemed to fill the entire space. Mariana took a deep breath, as if trying to gather her courage. "Lucas, I don't know what to say." Things weren't right between us. I felt alone. And you thought the solution was to look for company elsewhere, he interrupted, his tone sharp as a blade. Does that solve anything? She didn't answer right away. There were tears forming in her eyes, but Lucas didn't feel sorry. He wanted answers, not regret. I've lost myself, Lucas, she finally said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Lost yourself, he repeated, his incredulity evident. Mariana, you didn't lose yourself. You made choices. Conscious choices. You chose to betray me. You chose to lie. You chose to live a double life. His words cut like knives. Mariana closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that were now flowing freely. But it wasn't just guilt that consumed her. There was something else. Something she needed to say, but didn't know how. Lucas noticed her hesitation. He had always been good at reading Mariana, even in the subtlest moments. But now, what he saw was different. It was as if she was holding something that was suffocating her. There's more, isn't there? He asked, his voice lower, but still charged with tension. Mariana hesitated. She opened her mouth to reply, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Her silence said more than anything. Speak up, he exploded, losing patience. Whatever it is, I deserve to know. She recoiled at his outburst, but knew she couldn't put it off any longer. She had to face the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Lucas, I didn't want you to find out like this, she began, her voice almost a whisper. But Leonardo isn't just my boss. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas blinked, confused. He already knew about the betrayal. That was nothing new. But there was something in her tone, something that made the confession even heavier. What do you mean? He asked slowly, as if he feared the answer. Mariana swallowed. She felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. He's also my father. Lucas remained motionless. The information didn't make sense in his mind. He blinked a few times, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Your father, he repeated, incredulous. What are you talking about? My mother never wanted me to know, she explained, her voice trembling. Leonardo was a secret. She told me the truth a few years ago. And that's how we got close. At first, it was just to understand my past. But things got out of hand. Lucas felt the world around him spinning. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to fit together darkly. He had never imagined that something so insane could be happening right under his nose. Are you telling me you cheated on your husband with your own father? He asked, his voice now filled with a mixture of disgust and incredulity. Mariana didn't answer. Her lowered head and incessant tears were answer enough. Lucas stood up abruptly, his chair dragging across the floor with a sharp clatter. He walked around the kitchen, trying to organize his thoughts, which were now in complete chaos. Do you have any idea what you've done? He asked, his voice gradually rising. This isn't just betrayal, Mariana. This is sick. It's repulsive. She tried to speak, but he held up his hand, interrupting her. No. Don't try to justify it. There's no excuse for it. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He wanted to scream, cry, break everything around him. But at the same time, there was a growing coldness inside him, a barrier rising up to protect him from feeling even more pain. It's over, Mariana, he said at last, his voice icy. It's all over. Our marriage, our life together, everything. She burst into tears, but Lucas felt no empathy. He knew that, from that moment on, he had to move on, even if it meant leaving everything behind. And as he walked out the door, he felt a mixture of relief and despair. Relief at finally knowing the truth, at no longer living in doubt. And despair because that truth had destroyed everything he thought he knew. Lucas left the house with steady steps, but the weight of what he had just heard seemed to increase with every meter. He got into the car, closing the door tightly, as if that could contain the emotions that were overflowing inside him. The steering wheel became his only support as the world around him seemed to crumble. He needed to breathe, but the air seemed thin, unable to fill his lungs. He started the engine, but there was no destination. He just drove. The city was alive, indifferent to the chaos in his mind. The lights of the traffic lights and the sounds of the night seemed to mock his pain, reminding him that the world went on, even when his life had stopped. He pulled into an empty parking lot, turned off the car and leaned his head against the steering wheel. There were no tears, just a feeling of emptiness, as if something vital inside him had been ripped out. He picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment and finally called his best friend, Raphael. The call was short and to the point. Lucas asked them to meet at the bar they used to go to in college. Raphael, sensing the urgent tone, didn't ask any questions. He just agreed. When Lucas arrived, Raphael was already there, sitting at a table in the corner with 2 beers in front of him. He looked up and immediately realized how serious the situation was. Lucas looked like a broken man, a pale reflection of himself. "Speak up, man," Raphael began, in a cautious tone. "What happened?" Lucas sat down heavily and took a few seconds before answering. "I don't even know where to start. Everything I thought I knew was a lie." Raphael frowned, but waited for Lucas to continue. He knew his friend needed time to organize his thoughts. "Mariana, she betrayed me," Lucas finally said, the words coming out like a blow. "And that's not all. She cheated on me with her father." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Raphael blinked, confused, as if he'd heard wrong. "What?" he finally asked, his voice full of incredulity. "Are you telling me that she—" "Yes," Lucas interrupted, anger beginning to take the place of apathy. "She knew for years. She knew who he was, and yet she did what she did." Raphael leaned forward, his expression changing from surprise to concern. "Man, that's unbelievable. How are you coping?" "I'm not," Lucas admitted, his voice laden with frustration. "I don't know what to do. I can't even process what I've heard. It all seems surreal." The two were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Raphael finally broke the silence. "You need space, Lucas. You need to get out of this situation, if only for a while. Staying close to her now will only hurt you more." Lucas nodded slowly. He knew his friend was right, but even so, the thought of abandoning everything seemed unbearable. He wasn't just losing Mariana, he was losing the life they had built together. "And what are you going to do with that?" asked Raphael, pointing to the bottle of beer in front of Lucas. "Because, honestly, drinking isn't going to solve anything." Lucas let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know, Rafa. Maybe I need more than beer to get over this. Or maybe you need more than running away," Raphael replied, his tone serious. "Look, I'm here for whatever you need. But you need to face it head on. Because, as it is, she still has control over you." Raphael's words echoed in Lucas' mind. He knew his friend was right. Running away wasn't the solution. He needed to confront Mariana again, he needed clear answers, even if it hurt him even more. The next morning, Lucas returned home. The living room was empty, but there was a strange silence in the air, as if the space was holding its breath. Mariana was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, looking out of the window. When she noticed him, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were red, but she didn't say anything. "We need to talk," Lucas said bluntly. She nodded, but didn't move. Lucas sat down at the table and gestured for her to do the same. There was a tension in the air, as if they both knew that this would be their last confrontation. "I need to understand," he began, his voice firm but not hostile. "How did this happen? Why did you let it get to this point? Mariana took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. When my mother told me about Leonardo, I was confused. It was as if a part of me that had always been missing had finally appeared. I just wanted to get to know him, to understand who he was. And that justified what happened afterwards, asked Lucas, his voice becoming more tense. No, she admitted, the guilt evident in her expression. I'm not trying to justify it, Lucas. I just lost myself in the process. He manipulated me, made me feel things I shouldn't have felt. And before I knew it, I was in too deep. Lucas watched her, trying to find some truth in her words. He knew he couldn't trust her completely, but he had to listen to the end. What now? He asked at last. What do you expect me to do with this? Mariana hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't want us to end up like this. Lucas shook his head, his frustration evident. You didn't want us to end like this? Mariana, you've destroyed everything. There's no us left. All that's left is the damage. She didn't reply. There was nothing more to be said. Lucas got up, picked up his things and walked out the door without looking back. He knew that this was the end. From that moment on, he would have to rebuild his life from scratch. And, for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in the end, he would be able to find peace again. Lucas walked aimlessly after leaving the house where so many memories had been created, but which now looked like a mausoleum of what had once been a marriage. He needed air, he needed a place where he could think, but his mind was chaotic, like a storm that never let up. Each step seemed heavier, as if the ground was sucking away his strength. He entered a nearby park, a place he used to frequent with Mariana in the early years of their marriage. The trees seemed taller now, like silent witnesses to his pain. He sat on a secluded bench, his hands buried in his face, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions. The betrayal had been devastating, but what came after, the revelation of the secret, had destroyed any vestige of emotional stability he still possessed. Her words echoed in his mind like a broken record. I just wanted to get to know him, to understand who he was. How had something that had seemed so innocent, almost understandable, turned into such an absolute disaster? Lucas wanted to hate her completely, but there was a part of him that still sought to understand. It was this part that consumed him more than anything else. After a while, he decided to call Raphael again. He needed someone who wasn't directly connected to the chaos, someone who could listen without judging. Raphael answered on the second ring, and the familiar sound of his voice was like a small relief in the midst of the weight he was carrying. Lucas? Are you all right? Asked Raphael, without hiding his concern. I don't know if, well, is the right word, replied Lucas, with a tired tone. But I needed to talk to you. Raphael didn't hesitate. Where are you? Let's meet. Lucas gave him the address of the park, and in less than half an hour Raphael was there, with the same serious expression he had shown the night before. He sat down next to Lucas on the bench, not saying anything at first, just waiting for his friend to break the silence. I left home, Lucas said at last. I guess that was inevitable. Raphael shook his head in agreement. And what are you going to do now? I don't know, Lucas admitted. Part of me wants to disappear, to forget all this ever happened. But I know it's not that simple. I have to deal with it, somehow. Raphael took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Lucas, nobody knows how to deal with something like this. There's no manual for what you're going through. But what you need to remember is that it doesn't define who you are. What happened is about her, not about you. Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing his friend's words. He knew Raphael was right, but it was still hard not to feel as if the whole weight of the situation was a permanent shadow over his life. I just don't understand how I got here, he said, looking at the surrounding trees. I thought I knew Mariana. I thought I knew our story. Sometimes people surprise us in ways we never imagined, Raphael replied. And those surprises aren't always good. But that doesn't mean you failed. It just means that her choices defined her, not you. Lucas nodded slowly. Raphael's words helped, but they weren't a cure. It was like putting a bandage on a deep wound. The bleeding might stop for a while, but the pain was still there. While the two of them were talking, Lucas' phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw Mariana's name. His heart squeezed, but he knew he had to answer. With a sigh, he slid his finger across the screen and brought the phone to his ear. Lucas, Mariana began, her voice low and hesitant. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to find you. There are things you need to know. He was silent for a few seconds, considering whether he was ready to hear more. But something in her voice, something almost desperate, convinced him. Okay, he replied, finally. Where? Mariana suggested a nearby cafe, a place they used to frequent. It was an ironic choice, but Lucas agreed. Raphael looked at him with a questioning expression, but said nothing. He just patted his friend on the shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Lucas arrived at the cafe shortly after Mariana. She was sitting at a table in the corner, her hands folded on the table and her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in front of her. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but the gesture died before it was fully formed. Thank you for coming, she said when he sat down. I'm not here for you, he replied dryly. I'm here because I want to understand what else you think I need to know. Mariana nodded, accepting his tone without protest. She knew she had no right to expect kindness. She took a deep breath before beginning. I've thought a lot about everything that's happened, and I know that nothing I say will change what I've done. But there is one thing you need to know about Leonardo. Lucas frowned, his body stiffening. What is it? He's not who you think he is, she said, her voice almost a whisper. He's manipulative, controlling. He made me believe that I needed him, that he was the only person who could help me understand who I am. And I fell for it. I let myself be taken in by it all. Lucas watched her, his expression impassive. And what exactly do you want me to do with that? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I needed you to know. Because, after all, you deserve the truth. He shook his head, exasperated. The truth? Do you think telling me this now will change anything? The damage is already done, Mariana. There's no going back. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that, despite everything, I never wanted to hurt you. Lucas laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the cafe. Never wanted to hurt me? Mariana, you've destroyed everything. It's not just about me. It's about what we were, what we built. That's not something you can just explain away and hope will go away. She didn't reply. His words were a truth she couldn't dispute. All that remained was silence, filled with the sound of plates and cups around them. Lucas stood up, throwing a few bills on the table to pay for the coffee. He looked at Mariana one last time, his expression hardening. I hope you find what you're looking for. But don't look any further for me. He left, leaving Mariana alone at the table, her tears falling silently. It was the end of everything, and they both knew it. But for Lucas, it was also the beginning of something new. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't remain stuck in the past. And that in itself was a step forward. Lucas moved into a small apartment in the center. It wasn't very spacious, but it offered the necessary distance from the house that had once been a home and now only represented memories of pain. With each passing day, he rebuilt small pieces of himself, even though the weight of what had happened was still there. He started going to the gym, something he'd never had time to do before, and he put more energy back into his career. It was a way of occupying his mind and creating a new routine that didn't include Mariana, Leonardo, or the past. He avoided unnecessary contact with Mariana, limiting himself to the legal issues of the divorce. Selling the house was painful, but necessary. Lucas wanted to move on without the ties of a place that symbolized something that no longer existed. After the separation process was finalized, he decided to take a few days for himself, traveling to a quiet beach where he could reflect on everything and think about the future. Meanwhile, Mariana faced a very different scenario. After the revelation of the affair and her relationship with Leonardo, she became the target of company gossip. The rumors spread quickly, and the once comfortable working environment became hostile. Leonardo, realizing the negative impact on his position, began to distance himself from Mariana, treating her coldly and professionally. Before long, she felt isolated, both at work and in her personal life. Leonardo, for his part, saw his reputation plummet. When information about his relationship with Mariana reached senior management, he was confronted by his superiors. Although he denied the accusations, the evidence was hard to ignore. He was forced to resign, leaving the company in the midst of a scandal that shook its credibility. Without a job and under the weight of social judgment, he tried to regain control of his life, but the consequences of his choices would be with him for a long time. Mariana, now without Leonardo's support or the job she valued so much, began to rethink her decisions. Loneliness became a constant, and guilt ate away at her every day. She tried to seek refuge in conversations with friends, but most of them no longer saw her in the same way. It was in one of these conversations that a longtime friend said something that hit her deeply. "Mariana, maybe you should stop trying to justify everything and start forgiving yourself. That's the only way you'll be able to move on." These words stuck in Mariana's mind, and she decided to seek professional help. She started therapy, not only to understand the reasons behind her choices, but also to learn how to deal with the consequences. The process was slow and painful, but little by little she began to rebuild something within herself. She wasn't looking for reconciliation with Lucas, because she knew that was impossible, but she wanted to at least find peace with herself. Lucas, on the other hand, was surprised to find something unexpected in the midst of the chaos: a new connection. During a professional meeting, he met Sophia, a project consultant who had been hired to help with a new company initiative. Sophia was direct, perceptive, and had a sharp wit that disarmed Lucas in moments of tension. The conversations began shyly, always focused on work, but there was something in the way she looked at him, a kindness mixed with curiosity, that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt for a long time. Work meetings became casual dinners and, little by little, Lucas allowed himself to let his guard down. He still bore scars, but Sophia never pressured him. Instead, she created a space where he could be honest about his pain without fear of judgment. When Lucas finally told her about what had happened, Sophia just held his hand and said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't let the past define who you are." These words, simple but sincere, marked Lucas deeply. For the first time, he felt that maybe there was room for something new, something different. It wasn't about forgetting what happened, but about allowing himself to live again. While Lucas found a new perspective, Mariana finally decided to take an important step in her journey of self-discovery. She sent Lucas a letter, not with the intention of getting back together, but to apologize definitively and honestly. The letter was long, full of regret, but also gratitude for everything they had shared. "You were the best part of my life, Lucas, and I'm deeply sorry for ruining it. I hope that one day you find someone who loves and respects you as you deserve." Lucas read the letter in silence, sitting on the balcony of his apartment. Her words touched him, but he knew he had already moved on. He kept the letter in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of closure. In the end, everyone found their own way, even if it was full of obstacles. Leonardo moved to another city, trying to rebuild his career in an environment where his past wasn't so well known. Mariana continued her therapy and started working on a small freelance project, rediscovering her passion for creativity. And Lucas, with Sophia by his side, realized that love wasn't about perfection, but about finding someone who was willing to build something real together. Their story didn't have magical endings, but it did have real and human ones. Each faced the consequences of their choices and found a way to move on, learning that life, even in the midst of chaos, can offer new possibilities. If you've made it this far, we want to know what you think. What did you think of this story? Comment below, as your views are important to us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intense stories full of twists and turns. Remember, this channel does not support any kind of betrayal. See you next time.